Damnatio ad Bestias. Damnatio ad Bestias was one of the most terrifying spectacles in ancient Rome. It translates to condemnation to the beasts. Criminals, runaway slaves, and political prisoners were brought into the center of the massive Roman colosseums, completely unarmed and often naked. The crowd of tens of thousands would cheer as cages beneath the arena floor were opened, releasing starved wild animals like lions, tigers, and bears. The victims had absolutely no way to defend themselves. They could only run, but there was nowhere to hide. The predators would chase them down in front of the roaring audience, tearing them apart limb from limb. This wasn't just an execution, it was a highly theatrical blood sport designed to show the absolute power of the Roman state over its enemies. For the victims, the sheer psychological terror of waiting for the gates to open, followed by the agonizing pain of being eaten alive, made it one of the most feared fates in the ancient world. Peine Forte y Dure. Peine Forte y Dure, which means hard and forceful punishment, was a legal method used in England and early America to force accused criminals to enter a plea. If a prisoner refused to plead guilty or not guilty, the court couldn't put them on trial. To break their silence, they would be stripped naked, laid flat on their backs on the cold stone floor, and have a heavy wooden board placed over their chest. Day after day, the executioners would pile heavier and heavier iron weights and stone blocks on the board. The weight would slowly compress their lungs, making every single breath an agonizing struggle. Eventually, the immense pressure would crush their ribs, collapse their chest cavity, and suffocate them over several agonizing days. The most famous case of this was Giles Corey during the Salem witch trials, who chose to die under the heavy stones rather than enter a plea, keeping his land for his family. The Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden was one of the most iconic and terrifying devices associated with medieval torture. It was a tall, upright iron cabinet shaped like a human figure, featuring a double-hinged door on the front. When the victim was forced inside, they would find themselves staring at a terrifying sight. The inside of the doors were lined with dozens of long, sharp iron spikes. As the doors were slowly pushed closed, these spikes would pierce various parts of the victim's body. The terrifying genius of the design was that the spikes were strategically positioned not to pierce any vital organs instantly. Instead, they would puncture the eyes, chest, arms, and legs, causing immense pain and severe bleeding, but keeping the victim alive. Once the doors were fully shut and locked, the victim was left trapped in complete pitch-black darkness, suspended on the spikes, slowly bleeding to death over several days in total isolation. Gibbeting. Gibbeting, also known as hanging in chains, was a brutal public punishment used throughout medieval and early modern Europe. It was designed to serve as a gruesome warning to anyone thinking of committing a crime. The criminal, sometimes still alive, would be placed inside a tight, custom-made iron cage that perfectly fitted the shape of their body. This cage was then hoisted high into the air on a wooden gallows at busy crossroads, near rivers, or at town entrances. The victim was left hanging there, completely exposed to the blistering heat of the summer sun or the freezing winds of winter. With no food or water, dehydration and heat stroke would quickly set in. As the days dragged on, the victim would slowly weaken, listening to the birds of prey circle closer. Crows and ravens would begin picking at their eyes and flesh while they were still conscious. The decaying body was left to rot in public view for months or even years. Schwedentrunk. Schwedentrunk, or the Swedish drink, was a horrific method of torture popularized during the 30 Years' War in the 17th century. It was an incredibly cheap, fast, and disgusting way to extract information or punish peasants. The victim would be bound tightly to a chair or held down on the ground. A crude wooden funnel was forced deep into their throat, and the torturers would begin pouring massive quantities of a foul, putrid mixture down their esophagus. This mixture wasn't just water. It consisted of liquid manure, urine, boiling water, and whatever other liquid filth the soldiers could find. They would force-feed the victim until their stomach was painfully bloated and stretched to its absolute limit. To make the agony even worse, the torturers would then stomp on the victim's swollen belly with heavy boots, causing the internal organs to literally rupture and tear under the pressure, leading to a slow, agonizing death. The garrote. The garrote was a devastatingly simple and brutal Spanish method of execution that was used well into the 20th century. The victim was forced to sit in a wooden chair with their back flat against a heavy post. A metal collar or thick cord was placed around their neck and connected to a screw mechanism at the back of the post. The executioner would then slowly turn the handle of the screw, tightening the metal band around the victim's throat. This would gradually cut off the airflow and block the blood vessels leading to the brain. In more advanced and cruel versions of the device, a sharp metal bolt or spike was attached to the screw. As the handle was turned, this bolt would drive directly into the back of the victim's neck, crushing their spinal cord and breaking their neck. Depending on how fast the executioner turned the screw, death could either be a sudden, crushing snap or a slow, agonizing suffocation that lasted for several terrifying minutes. The iron chair. The iron chair, also known as the spiked chair, was a terrifying instrument designed to extract confessions through absolute physical agony. As the name suggests, it was a heavy chair constructed entirely out of iron, but with a horrifying twist. Every single surface, including the seat, the backrest, the armrests, and the leg supports, was covered in hundreds of sharp, cold metal spikes. The victim would be stripped naked and strapped tightly into the chair using heavy leather belts. The executioners would tighten the straps, forcing the sharp spikes to dig deeper and deeper into the victim's bare flesh. To make this torture truly unbearable, a small charcoal fire was often placed directly underneath the iron seat. The heat would slowly travel up through the metal, turning the cold spikes into searing hot irons that burned and melted the victim's flesh from the inside out, causing unimaginable pain without causing instant death. The lead sprinkler. The lead sprinkler was a highly specialized and terrifying torture device used during the medieval Inquisition. It resembled a metal ladle with a hollow perforated metal sphere at the end, much like a watering can. The executioners would fill this sphere with boiling liquid, such as molten lead, boiling oil, liquid pitch, or melted sulfur. They would then stand over the bound victim and vigorously shake the sprinkler. Searing droplets of the molten substance would rain down through the tiny holes, landing directly under the victim's bare skin, face, or into their eyes. The molten lead would instantly burn through the outer layers of skin, searing the flesh and eyeballs, and cooling into solid, painful crusts that had to be peeled off, taking the destroyed skin with it. This process was repeated over and over, creating a slow, agonizing cycle of burning and disfigurement. The Scavenger's Daughter. The Scavenger's Daughter, invented during the reign of King Henry VIII in England, was a horrific torture device designed to do the exact opposite of the famous rack. While the rack stretched the victim's body to its breaking point, the Scavenger's Daughter was an A-shaped iron bracket designed to compress it. The victim was forced to kneel on a wooden platform, and their head, hands, and feet were locked into the iron frame. The executioner would then turn a screw mechanism that slowly folded the frame inward, forcing the victim's chest down onto their thighs and pulling their head down toward their knees. This violent compression put immense pressure on the rib cage, spine, and internal organs. The pressure was so extreme that it would literally fracture the spine, crush the lungs, and force blood to burst out from the victim's nose, mouth, ears, and even eyes, causing a slow, suffocating death. Crucifixion. Crucifixion was one of the most painful, humiliating, and drawn-out methods of execution ever devised, widely used by the Roman Empire. The victim was stripped naked and had their arms stretched out along a wooden beam, where heavy iron nails were driven directly through their wrists or hands. They were then hoisted onto a vertical wooden post, and their feet were nailed to the wood as well. The true cruelty of crucifixion lay in its design. It didn't kill through blood loss, but through slow, agonizing asphyxiation. As the victim hung from the cross, their body weight would pull down on their chest, making it impossible to breathe out. To take a single breath, they had to push themselves upward using their nailed feet and pulled with their shredded wrists. This created a horrific cycle where the victim had to constantly torture themselves just to stay alive, until dehydration, exposure, and ultimate muscle failure forced them to give up.